Hello, good afternoon, everyone. We've had some technical challenges, so apologies for the slight delay to the start of this meeting. So good afternoon, and thank you for joining us at this joint National Consortium for Societal Resilience and Resilience Beyond Observed Capabilities Network Plus webinar on how to retain volunteers. A reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch back later. So my name is Andrew McClelland, and I'm a research fellow at the University of Manchester. And as well as welcoming you to this webinar, I will also be moderating the questions and answer sessions later on. You will have noticed that your mics and cameras are currently switched off, but you can contribute questions and comments throughout via the chat function or by using the Mentimeter details shown on the slide. I have also added a link to the Mentimeter to the top of the chat. We are aware that some of you in previous webinars were unable to access the chat function, so that's why we're trying this experiment to run a Mentimeter in parallel. So hopefully through those two systems, you will be able to share your comments and questions. For those who are able to access the chat via Teams, please continue to do so. But for everyone else, please use the Mentimeter. Our agenda for today is straightforward, and we're absolutely delighted to welcome our three excellent speakers. We have Michelle from Support Staffordshire, and we have Joe and Rachel from Basingstoke Voluntary Action. So our recent engagement with local community resilience groups has really indicated to us a number of the top issues on which they would like to learn more about. So we held a number of meetings towards the end of last year. We also had a survey, and we've had further engagement with local community resilience groups where people indicated to us the top issues that they would like to have webinars related to. So hence we have created this How to Communities webinar series. At the end of this webinar, I will share with you the dates of the upcoming webinars in June and at the beginning of July. And for those of you who haven't yet signed up, we will also then share a link where you will be able to access the registration page for those upcoming webinars. However, over to today's session. And attracting and retaining volunteers was identified as a common challenge for many voluntary community and social enterprise sector organisations. So through this webinar, we're really hoping to spotlight examples and provide a supportive space for people to share experiences and transferable lessons that you can bring into your local community resilience group or other organisations that you might interact with within the VCSE enterprise sector organisation sector. Not only hearing from obviously today's speakers, but then we hope through the Q&A session and through the comments that people will be able to share their experiences and learning. So please feel free to add in links to the chat and also then on the Mentimeter via comments. Without further ado, I will ask Michelle if Michelle is able to then kick us off the presentation. So Michelle will do a short kind of 5-minute firstly around some of the context to volunteering. And then immediately after Michelle, then Joe and Rachel will share some of their experience around why do people volunteer or help, but also why people might stop volunteering or helping. At that point, obviously, depending on how many questions we have, we might take a number of questions from the audience before then hearing from Joe and Michelle again, who will then focus at that point on community groups on how they can attract and retain volunteers. So Michelle, if you're able to share your slides then and take us through the first 5 minutes.
Within the chat, there's just some questions on AI. So do you want to just clear them up first?
I will take a look through that, Michelle, if you're able to share your slides.
Yeah, great. Yeah, sure. So I'm just going to start with adding very basic context to today's session, and I'm starting with understanding really what is a volunteer. So really to put this into context and the reason why we're here today and talking about volunteering and volunteering sector and who volunteers and how we work with volunteers, I think it's just really very basic, but just to clarify what is a volunteer. And everyone will have different understanding, different experiences. You've either been involved yourselves, or you know volunteers, or you recruit or manage volunteers. So this context hopefully will help anybody to just clarify, and we're on the same understanding of what volunteering means. So essentially, a volunteer is a person who freely offers to take part in an enterprise or undertaking a task. So therefore, we wouldn't say that helping close friends or relatives isn't necessarily classed as volunteering. Obviously, it's essential in supporting people, but doing something to benefit society, people, animals, nature, the environment, for instance, is volunteering. It's also a person who works for an organisation without being paid. So volunteering can be seen as formal and organised by organisations, or it can be informal, which is not organised through a specific organisation, but led by needs within local communities. It should always be by the free choice of a person who is giving up their time. Volunteering is well established in the UK. Most charities and voluntary organisations involve volunteers in some way. So what we recognise at Support Staffordshire, we often use the reference to volunteers are like gold dust. When you have them, you want to keep them. You want to give them the best experience you can. They're hard to find, so treat them well. Volunteering is not like employment. Volunteers aren't employees and therefore aren't covered by employment law. So it's important really to maintain that difference between paid staff and volunteers. So it should always be clear that volunteering is the volunteer's choice. Volunteering roles aren't the same as employee roles, and volunteers aren't a replacement for paid staff. So recognise within this that you don't treat them the same as your employees. So to ensure this, volunteers, some suggestions would be use of language that suggests employment. For instance, refer to any volunteer agreements rather than having a contract. Having separate processes for recruiting and supporting staff and volunteers. Talk about what you expect from volunteers rather than saying they must or they have to do anything. And you really can't sanction volunteers for not meeting their expectations. We can support them, we can talk to them, we can ask around, what the issues are, but sanctioning is difficult. Avoiding perks also that could look like payment, for example, training that's not necessarily needed for the role, or paying out-of-pocket expenses. We can do that instead of paying a fixed amount. And it's often that we can't ask volunteers to book or apply for holiday or time off. So that's the first section to add the context around what we think around volunteers, and I'm going to hand over now to Jo. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks, Michelle.
So Jo and Rachel, if you're able to share your slides, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see them now.
Lovely. Well, while that slide's up, I would just say that we're from Basingstoke Voluntary Action, and our roles really for the last year and a bit has been to support our volunteer hub. So we're really just giving some of the things that we've noticed in that time.
Yeah. So we're looking at why people volunteer. So we thought we'd start with the obvious reasons, especially for emergency response. So obviously the first being people that are, have been personally disrupted by the emergency, and then people that know people that have been affected by the emergency. So family, friends, neighbours, religious communities that come together, people having the time to do it, and then wanting to give back to the community, and also people that have experience in emergency response. So people that, have worked in the armed forces, and emergency services. So that's kind of the emergency response why people might volunteer.
And then some of the other reasons we get when we chat to volunteers who come into the hub, some of it might be they want to get involved in their community. So that sense of belonging, getting to know local people. There is a lot of loneliness we find around people who want to volunteer. There's, other reasons as well, but to meet people and be part of their local community and strengthen the local community, they might see that there are gaps in their area and they might want to support work being done locally around them and seeing the benefits of that.
So improving mental and physical health, so engaging with like-minded people, that helps bring people out of their shell, but also being able to choose the pace and commitment, which you can't necessarily do with paid employment. So, someone might start out with an hour, and then as their mental and physical health improves, they might be able then to commit to more time, but it works for them.
It could be increasing confidence, along with that. We do have quite a few people who come in and they may have been off work with, mental health issues or physical health issues, and that sort of increasing their confidence by just doing, as Rachel said, those few hours. So an opportunity to redevelop those skills, and again meet new people. They might have been quite isolated if they've been off, and also exposure to new experiences. So that could even be anybody wanting to do something different from their 9 to 5, trying different things out. We have people who sometimes elect to volunteer for a certain organisation for a year, and then the next year they'll move on to something different and maybe try a different role. So it's almost trying those new experiences without the work commitment to it. So we found that. And then
sense of purpose as well. So people whose children have started school, or maybe empty nesters, the children have left home, kind of regaining that sense of purpose that they once had. Also following bereavement. So, we've got volunteers who have lost partners, unfortunately, and kind of trying to just get back out there. And people that maybe have looked after elderly parents for a long time. We speak to volunteers, especially those looking to befriend, who have looked after elderly parents, and they use that as motivation, and they understand the importance and then want to kind of continue that support for someone else. So something else to consider as well, that's not necessarily the obvious, is people volunteer for professional development. It's obviously improves your skill set. It's a fantastic networking opportunity. Looks great on your CV, and the obvious, obviously increasing your social skills.
So this goes right across the age range as well. So young people like to volunteer. I mean, sometimes it will be linked with a D&V, but sometimes it is just to get that experience, to have something to put on their CV before they sort of venture out into the world of work. And that's always really useful. It can be people going back to work from a family break. So one of our lovely volunteers on reception, she's been sort of improving. She came along and she said, I want to get a job, but I'd like to improve my communication skills and my IT skills, and just, you know, getting back out into the adult world, as it were, after her children went to school. And she's been with us a couple of years now, and she's really come on, and she's told us that she is going to actually start applying for jobs. So it also, we're able to give her a reference, which is really nice. So there's that element, but also moving on, when somebody wants to sort of move up the ladder, there's sort of leadership. We're really trying to encourage organisations to get their sort of, you know, potential young leaders into things like volunteering as board members or trustees, and sharing some of their experiences, and also for the element of, you know, networking around other board members, and, you know, the skills that they can gain from that, the mentorship and things. So, you know, there's a definite thumbs up for all of the professional development that people can gain from volunteering.
So obviously we've looked at why people volunteer, but the other thing to look at is reasons people stop volunteering.
So it can be family commitments. So it can be sort of some of the younger volunteers might stop for a family break. It could be childcare related in other ways. So grandparents with childcare. People being time poor once those children start to go to clubs, and all of the time commitments that might be involved in having a family. It could be also, and we are experiencing this as well for a couple of our volunteers, that they're now caring for elderly relatives, and that commitment has become more and more so, to the point where, you know, one has had to say they're no longer able to volunteer, which is, you know, totally understandable, but it's a reason for stopping.
Financial, so obviously we're in a cost of living crisis, which for some people will mean, you know, maybe getting a second job, or taking more hours on at work. So, you know, their time is more precious and need to be paid for their time.
It could also be that the need has passed. So if it was an emergency response, obviously once that emergency is over, they might see their role has ended, and therefore, you know, maybe move on to something else, or maybe think that they've done their bit. Or it could be specific tasks. Some of our local community groups might want people to come on board to do a short project. So somebody will go on and do that project, and then, you know, they may well stay on, but they might move on to something else where they can be of use in a similar way, sort of project planning or setting up websites or things like that. So it could be that need has passed.
And the other thing to consider is conflict. Obviously, there are going to be differing views, so on either the direction of the organisation or how the volunteers are managed, clashes of personalities. If you've got a large group of volunteers, there's, you know, unfortunately there's bound to be a clash of personalities. And another one to consider as well is cliques. Sometimes, you know, especially if groups have been volunteering for a long time, they can kind of form a bit of a clique, which for a new person coming in to volunteer makes it difficult to kind of integrate and feel, you know, part of. So I don't think people necessarily mean to create those cliques, but it's just something to consider and be aware of. And that's us.
That's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Rachele and Joe, for the initial thoughts. Obviously, we do have another bit involving Michelle in terms of community groups attracting and retaining volunteers with slides, but I think just take a brief pause at this point in case anyone would like to raise their hand if there are any kind of burning questions or thoughts that people may have. please raise your hand, and obviously then I would be able to unmute and bring you on camera. If there are none at this point, then obviously we're able to move straight on to Michelle. But I would also then encourage people then to keep on adding comments to the chat or via the Mentimeter. So I'll just give another few seconds in case any hands are raised. Otherwise, Michelle, if you can begin. So I see Becky. So Becky, I'll just locate you, and if people whenever you're posing your question, if you could please just say which organisation or which group you're with before posing your question. So Becky, you should be able to now.
Yeah, I think can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Brilliant. I've got a whole series of questions, but the first one that I'm really interested in from both of the speakers, sorry, all of the speakers, is regarding the discussion that was had around the volunteer passport scheme. So something that's been mooted, discussed, it's gone in, it's gone out, but this was very much about kind of, I guess, cross referencing with agencies, so DBS checks and things like that. And I'd say it's as relevant to emergency response as to any kind of volunteering, and just how the panelists feel about that, if it's something that is still on the agenda or if that has completely disappeared from the discussion, shall we say. Thank you.
From our point of view, that's not been in vogue, let's say, for probably 3 years. We've not and there's been no discussion around it. So it was local authority led initially, but there's no requirement for volunteers at this point to have a passport as such. And I haven't, to be fair, I mean, I know there was the scheme, but I haven't been involved in that at all.
Michelle,
from my perspective, again, thanks, Becky. I've heard of it. I believe our volunteer manager at Support Staffordshire went in to learn about it from another organisation. So I think it would depend on local areas and whether it's felt it would work in those areas. So so Emma Paxton is our volunteer manager for Support Staffordshire, and she felt it wouldn't work within Staffordshire. So again, that's understanding, I think, the sector, what works locally, and the expectation of using a passport scheme. So I think it probably would have to be locally decided in different areas. It could work in some. So, and I'm not saying it wouldn't work. We just felt the amount of resource to put behind it would be quite high, and it wasn't deemed worthwhile for ourselves.
I wonder,
Thanks,
Becky,
oh, sorry.
I wonder, Becky, what would your perspective be in relation to the issue that you've raised?
I mean, so it's a really interesting one because, I mean, it brought up loads of complex issues. But I think the sort of cross-cutting DBS factor was one, certainly during COVID, and whether, if you get a DBS check with one organisation, I know you can now get them that are transferable. But it was more kind of skills based, and there was a lot of discussion about, right, how could a volunteer effectively have something there on their iPhone that says, right, these are my skills, these are my qualifications, and that can be checked effectively instantaneously. But I realise it's a very complex issue, but I think there was a lot of discussion around it sort of 2-3 years ago, and then it just sort of fell off the radar. So I was just really interested if it was something that was on anyone's radar at all.
Well, thank you very much. So it appears to, that appears to be the case, in that it's not so high on agendas at present. I also see in the chat that Sasha, you've obviously then referred to the DBS checks as well. Thanks to those who are adding comments and questions to the chat. Obviously, Michelle, Rachel, Joe, feel free whenever you're not speaking to also look at the chat, and if there are any particular responses to some of the questions raised, please do so. And for those who are adding questions to the chat, then whenever we come to the larger kind of Q&A segment, please feel free also then to raise your hands, and you'll be able to verbalize your question rather than us just taking it from the chat. So I think, Michelle, I think we're good to go on then to your next bit, please, if you're able to share your slides. Yep, so I can see them now, Michelle.
Yeah, I got the slides, but I couldn't work out how to unmute myself again. So there we are. So my next part will be the attracting and retaining volunteers. So I feel like we're under a lot of pressure now if this is the bit that everybody's waiting for all the answers for. So this will be my section looking on how, in the context of community groups, could attract and retain volunteers. So there is quite a lot of information out there. I'm not saying a particular expert within this field. As I say, we do have a specialist volunteer advisor at Support Staffordshire who manages our volunteer centre and the volunteering team. Unfortunately, Emma was unable to join me today, but what I do have is I have personal experiences of volunteering over the years. I've got some good experiences, some bad experiences, but I have also volunteered for 10 years now as chair of trustees for my local village hall, which gives me that sort of leadership responsibility and understanding what it means in a local small community around volunteers. And I've also worked now in local infrastructure for 15 years, and I can therefore provide capacity building, information, advice and guidance to community groups and organisations. So if we take this as the information where we'd support our member organisations to learn how to attract and retain volunteers. So there's a lot, like I say, a lot of resource and information out there. So I may have missed some bits which other people may have knowledge of. So I'll start with, so first of all, how do we find volunteers? I think this is one of the key questions everybody asks, and how can we possibly find any more volunteers? It's sometimes challenging in hyperlocal or local level for community groups. But there are some methods we can suggest, which most of these will have been tried and tested. So you can use some or all of these. The more you use, the better. And really, it's what works for you and within the context of your community. So things like word of mouth. I mean, this is one of the most impactful, I think, ways of asking somebody if they want to volunteer, because actually that feeling of being personally asked does make a difference, because they feel like, oh, I feel, you know, quite privileged that you've asked me to do that. Also posters and flyers. See a lot of posters, flyers going up, stuck on notice boards, stuck on, you know, all sorts of things around the community. Is that going to attract the volunteers? Don't know, it's questionable, but it can be tried. I think there's also that reluctance that, okay, well, I'm not really going to, you know, worry. Somebody else is going to do it. Somebody else will respond to that advert, you know, and that doesn't need to be me who's going to respond. Holding open days and information sessions. That's a really good way of talking to the community about opportunities. So it doesn't necessarily have to be just yourselves. You could do it as a collective with other organisations. Asking neighbours who've got family or people that they know, again, just spreading out that message. Ask your existing volunteers. So ask an existing volunteer to bring along another person with them to show them what you do. Again, social media, websites, those sorts of things, similar way of just reaching more people in different ways. So you're reaching a different audience. Again, local newsletters, parish news, those sorts of things. Really, really do spread that message of we need more volunteers, can you help type thing. Then finally, utilising your local CVS or local infrastructure organisation And I'll come back to that a little bit later, how ourselves, so Support Staffordshire would be a infrastructure organisation, and there are many across the country. So one of the first things we need to do is to identify the volunteer roles that you need. So it's a good starting point in thinking, okay, if we were setting up a community emergency hub, for instance, which would be based on the NCSR guidance, then we might need at least these 5 are highlighted in the guide. So it's not saying that these are needed in every case. There might be more, there might be less, but this gives you a good basis to think about what volunteers are needed. So your hub coordinator, this role would coordinate activities to meet the community emergency hub objectives. The information role is to collect and display information on what is happening to help to prioritise needs. Communications, this role would be important to provide that information within the community emergency hub and to external audiences. So that's like your little bit of comms person. And it could also communicate with the emergency coordination centre or the coordination point. Somebody or a few people helping to coordinate, match the needs and offers within the community. So when people write their needs on a needs display board, and they're matching those with offers of help on a display board. So volunteers help to do that, again, that brokerage between the two, what people are offering and what people need. So things like accommodation or food or clothing or whatever it is within that situation. And reception, this is the role where it would be the friendly face or the friendly place that offers a space for people to come together. So that welcoming first impression of somebody there at the first point of call. So this would be based on an informal type model. If the development of the group needed to move forward more into a formalised structure, that could either be for growth purposes, such as applying for funding, buying insurance, strengthening governance, or improving its role and place within communities, because communities like some accountability, they like to know what's going on, and actually, you know, that less formal structure to more of a formal structure might create additional roles. So a formal structure would generally have either committee members, if it's an informal structured organisation, an unincorporated organisation, or if it decides to register as a charity, it would be trustees. So within that, there are roles for officers. Again, these are the standard roles of a committee, and they're your standard roles to be able to perform functions around the committee. And then other roles might be fundraising or bid writing to bring in some funds, communications, sharing out messages on social media, continuing further work, or marketing, so letting people know and creating contacts and those sorts of things. And further ideas you may want to consider is not only thinking, well, we'll come back to making volunteering inclusive in a moment, but to think about the skills and experiences you want your volunteers to have, thinking about any barriers that make it hard for volunteers to find the opportunity and therefore to apply or to let you know that they're ready and want to help. Providing information in different languages or formats, and offering flexibility around timings, location, those sorts of things. So does it always have to be in person, or can activities be performed remotely, or can there be a mixture? So if we plan as much as we can around making volunteering inclusive, it's thinking about how we adapt and create the roles, or a role, so it's accessible to all people with lots of different backgrounds, skills and experiences. We also need to think about support for volunteers' well-being, because again, volunteering roles can be either physically or emotionally demanding. So we need to think about how we're going to support volunteers by giving them breaks, by thinking about, we don't want fatigue to set in, you don't want to put off your volunteers in the first instance. How can we support volunteers going forward? So when you create your role, we can think about, adapting that, as I say, so using lots and lots of toolkits, resources and help available to assist and welcome volunteers across all different backgrounds. And there's a little website in the slides there which gives information on involving volunteers. So once you've attracted your volunteers in whichever way you can to gather them in and get them supporting you and helping your community group to thrive, is making sure that you retain them. So volunteers, as we say, are gold dust. So there are some key things we can suggest to help your volunteers going forward. So think about how you well, this is about valuing volunteers and really helping them to feel appreciative. So make them feel included. So first of all, think if you have a recruitment process, which sometimes helps to go through that process, so you actually know who you're bringing in, that you have had a conversation with them, you know who they are, what they want to bring, what they're giving. And that actually your needs, what you want from the organisation is actually what they can give as well. So it's that process around that. We can then welcome them, we can set and embed them within an organisation, learning about the culture of the group, giving them an induction or process. And it might, it sounds very formal, but it doesn't have to be formal. It could just be having a chat with them, just welcome them and sit them down and explain. Or also, what I do in my as a volunteer for my charity is if new volunteers want to come on board onto the committee, actually, you don't have to commit straight away. Come along to a couple of meetings, see what you think. Is it for you? Is it going to be right? Is this what you want or you expect? Because obviously committee meeting is sometimes, oh no, people definitely don't want to do that, but other people love it and they want to get involved. So I think it's having that time to, just embed them in before actually going through a process of saying, yes, you are now co-opted as a trustee, welcome. Again, sometimes if it's an AGM happening, sometimes it's that essential that you haven't got that time to do that preparation. But if you can gather people in the year between your AGMs, sometimes it's a way of getting them involved. But once you've got your volunteers, keep them in touch, keep them in communication, either in newsletters or emails or updates again if you've got staff, have them in team meetings and create that positive environment. Make volunteers feel valued. So look at the volunteers as individuals. So everybody is there for their own personal reasons. So listen to them without judgment, trust and value them, and express how much gratitude you want to give them for joining in, for coming along, and really valuing them for what they give, not what they can't do, what they can do. So again, my expectation would never be, you've got to do this. It's actually do as much as you can. That in my context of the working with village halls. So then we've got to think about safety. So mentioned breaks, supervision. We could also think about training and awareness raising. So this is where we give them opportunities to be more aware of themselves, what they need to do, understanding different contexts. So again, any opportunity for training, even if it's free, just try and find out what is relevant, what is appropriate, and what they can be supported in to learn and support that role. So again, whistleblowing is one of those things that people feeling safe, that they know how to communicate and that they can report something safely if they don't feel right about something. And being honest with any feedback you have with them as well. Also, if there was exit interviews or people are leaving, or if suddenly you think it's really, really hard to maintain volunteers, you could have an opportunity to chat when they leave and actually ask what would have made a difference, if they felt supported or not, or and recognise and implement any suggestions that you can make going forward. Some other ideas might be to offer volunteer expenses. Again, it's not always essential, but offering expenses might help somebody to think that they haven't got to worry about using their own car to get to somewhere, that actually, that we've got a process that they can claim mileage back, and offer potentially uniform, even if it's just a high vis or a lanyard or a volunteer badge or a t-shirt or something like that, so that actually shows that they are volunteering. Again, retention is by recognising the role that volunteers play. So when NCVO asked about volunteer recognition, 4 in 10 people agreed that it is important to recognise people for their volunteering efforts. So a simple thank you is enough, and that is, makes such a difference to how people feel valued again and want to stay and want to feel like involved with a group. But there are other things we can do, and again, it depends on what works for you. So there are volunteer awards opportunities. There are putting people forward for that sort of recognition around how we promote them and share them and get loads and loads of award ceremonies, and that run by commercial companies or other organisations, or it might be that you have your own internal annual event. If there is good feedback from anyone who has been supported by your volunteers, then feed that back to them, because again, that is really valuing them. That don't keep it within yourselves. That we know this, but we're not telling you how great this feedback is. That actually, thank you for that, because our users and our clients have said this is the difference that it made to us. And again, you could do that through a blog or a social media, or just saying thank you to our volunteers. This is what difference we make. Then, I don't know, merchandise. You could offer them tote bags. You could offer them little bits of equipment. Again, if you're a bigger organisation, that's easier to do than if you're a smaller organisation. But actually feeling like they have their own things and they feel like part of a team, that might make a difference to some people. Or other things might be low-cost tokens, and I do believe there are some platforms available which might help to give people a bit of volunteering recognition. There are other things like charity workers discounts, so if you, a bit like volunteers can apply to get some benefits through reward systems and discounting on insurance or other things, that actually by being a volunteer for an organisation, they can receive some discounts from buying online. So the next thing to recognise really is within this is how local infrastructure organisations like Support Staffordshire, like my colleagues on the call from Basingstoke, can also help with advice and guidance in supporting volunteers, or that's organisations and volunteers. So some of Support Staffordshire particularly, we run a brokerage service. We are volunteer centre quality accredited. We can match volunteers to local volunteering roles. So this is across the board of all types of volunteering. So if we know there's a role, people can apply and we match them up together through, it's like a dating system of matching through what people want to do and organisations that want them. We also have volunteer advisors who can help to identify skills and help them to put people into the right role. Sometimes in places we have employment support or equality, people working with equalities and diverse needs to promote volunteering for all. That that way of finding the right sort of organisations who want volunteers to offer them, as Joe said, really around different levels of work, finding work, increasing CVs and so on that was mentioned. We're available to offer answers around volunteering and what it means, understanding the sector, and guidance on volunteer management, retention and training. And if you don't know where to find your local NAVCA member, then please have a look on the NAVCA website. This is where the registered NAVCA members will be located. And again, under support and development, capacity building, we can offer on developing volunteer policies. We can undertake volunteer management health checks. We can offer management training. So, you know, a lot of our courses would be around how volunteers are included and volunteer support and all those sorts of things. So that bespoke training course. We can offer advice on funding and DBS requirements, and also succession planning. So again, once organisations have been around for many, many years, and it's been the same person for years and years and years, actually, we need to think about succession and how that works within the changing sector. So remember, volunteers are unpaid, again, because they're not because they are worthless, because they are priceless. And think about the gold dust element there within that. And I hope that gives you enough information on a short context around attracting and retaining volunteers. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Michelle. That was a fantastic run through. So thank you for obviously providing us the introduction at the beginning, but then also in relation to that, how community groups can attract and retain volunteers. And obviously to Rachel and Joe in relation to why do people volunteer, and also why people stop volunteering. As my camera appears to be waking up, I'll still continue, and it will waken up at some point, but it's really to, I think, open the floor to you all. I see there are lots of comments in the chat, and obviously a number of questions, and it would be really fantastic if people felt able to raise your hand and then I can enable your mics and your cameras so that you can ask those questions yourselves. I see some great comments, from Beth Hopwood, for example, in relation to mismatch between what volunteers want to deliver and what the role needs are. I see other kind of questions and comments from Fiona Galbraith, from Joe Hannett, who else, from Emma Crofts, and others. So thank you very much for contributing to the chat so far, but it would be great now if people could raise their hand so that we can then maybe ask some of these questions directly to Michelle, Joe, and Rachel. So if I could ask for that now, that would be fantastic. I wonder, as people are doing that, Rachel and Joe, obviously Michelle has just finished up. Is there any further comments that you might like to make in relation to what Michelle has just said around how can groups attract and retain volunteers?
Well, one of the things Michelle did mention was around sort of, thanking the volunteers, and part of my other hat I wear for Basingstoke Voluntary Action is I look after the orchard, which we're really fortunate as an organisation to house 14 charities within the building. So one of the things we do on an annual basis is to give all the organisations an opportunity to invite their volunteers along for an afternoon tea. We do it in Volunteers Week. Tea and cake go a long way to making people happy, and it's a really nice opportunity for the different volunteers to meet each other, and for us to meet some of the other volunteers around the building as well, which is really lovely. So I think it was about 80 people we housed last year in the garden, which was lovely, and the mayor was able to come over. So a really good opportunity to say a big thank you to all of the different organisations, volunteers, but we are in a very fortunate position to have the space to do that. And just on one of the other, to do with retention and sort of, you know, volunteering, one of the other things we have found is when we're sort of looking at why people aren't volunteering as much, and it's having the having to be able to commit on a weekly basis. They find that really difficult, just because of maybe shift work or commitments, or, you know, just different things. So in response to that, we have at Basingstoke Voluntary Action created our own little buddy scheme, where we have people who would like to volunteer, but on a more ad hoc basis. And it's in its infancy. It's only about a month old, but we have about 20 buddies, and then our organisations, we went out to ask if they had any one-off opportunities or things that they needed support with over the next few months. And there are lots of summer fetes coming up. We've got a duck race, and there's lots of different things that people, it just one-offs, and then we send out emails to those volunteers, and so it's sort of us adapting to the changing face of volunteers, really. But the organisations seem to be quite pleased with having a group of people who are already I'm going to say vetted, or, you know, interviewed, that we can supply at quite short notice. So that's one of the ways we're sort of trying to adapt to the volunteering changes, really.
Just something else to add with my comms hat on. Talk about Volunteers Week. I don't know if you guys might already know about it, but if you Google Volunteers Week 2025, there is a fantastic website that has loads of resources on there. So if, you know, you want to do a shout out or a thank you, that's a great place to kind of get some resources from. Just thinking with my comms hat on. So yeah,
Great.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe and Rachel. So yeah, certainly encourage people to Google and to make those connections and see what other information's available. Just as I speak, I see Julie has placed a comment in the chat in relation to micro volunteering, and obviously what you've all just been talking about in relation to yeah, those kind of small scale kind of volunteering acts that then can potentially lead to volunteers making longer term commitments subsequently. So thanks, Duncan, for adding the volunteers week link to the chat. I wonder if Emma or Fiona or others in the chat who've made substantial comments, especially around, I think, kind of transferable skills or skills development in relation to volunteers. I see Fiona, that's great. You've just put your hand up, so I will locate you so that I can unmute, and both Fiona and Beth. So if you're able to then maybe just say which organisation you're from, and then obviously make your point. I will also then come to Beth after Fiona. So thank you, Fiona. Please go ahead. You should be able to unmute Fiona now.
Oh, there I can.
Yeah,
hi.
That's
Yeah,
great.
so
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I volunteer with a number of organisations. I volunteer with React, but I'm also asking the question because I'm also a chair of trustees, and because of the challenge with recruiting people, I'm pursuing a project to try and formalise a training path that benefits the organisation, but also will benefit, I hope, trustees in their professional lives, in order that whilst we don't pay them, we're providing some benefit that they take back into their organisation. And so I'm just interested at the moment if anyone else has done anything that way. I'm grateful to a couple of people who've mentioned in the comments that obviously they as individuals have taken a great deal into their personal and professional lives from their volunteering experience. And I agree that is a huge benefit, and the speakers have very kindly mentioned all the benefits, but I haven't come across many schemes where that's formally acknowledged. In fact, some organisations are a bit embarrassed about saying that. So I just wonder if anybody has attempted to be very upfront about saying this is a benefit to you as a volunteer, this is what we will do to support you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I wonder, either Michelle, Joe, Rachel, if you'd like to make any comments on that, then yeah, please come off mute. But equally, if there are others on the call who would maybe like to raise their hands or to put something into the chat, then please do so also.
But the only thing I was really going to say is we have tried to encourage a lot of our members who are trying to recruit, rather than having a full long list of what the volunteer can do for them. We've sort of, and we did it ourselves as well, actually, is to put down just the list of benefits. So it was almost like a job description, and it was the benefits to the volunteer. I mean, not to do with being a trustee, but on reception is communication, developing communication skills, developing IT skills, all the different elements around it. So it wasn't just that sort of, oh, we need you to do X, Y, and Z. It was, feeding into what they will gain from it as well. So it's not not formalised or anything like that, but it goes some way to doing that. And in Trustees Week, we really promoted that last year, didn't we? Sort of what the benefits for the volunteers.
Michelle, I wonder if you had anything that you might like to add to that.
No, I can. I think I'd probably just agree with Joe, to be honest, because I can't give any personal experiences because it's not necessarily something I would have come across myself. So, but I do. Yeah, I totally agree with how Joe's explained it, to be honest.
Thank you. So Beth, your hand is also raised, so you should be able to come off mute. So I still see your. Beth, are you able to come off mute? You should be. You've been enabled. So perhaps you're having some technical challenge. I see, obviously, in relation to the chat, just some additional links plus comments being made. So Duncan has added then in relation to Trustees Week as well, but then Becky in terms of always giving people LinkedIn recommendations for volunteering as a sort of a basic but can be effective and obviously highly visible way of making sure people's volunteering experiences is recognised. We have a number of other comments within the chat, and I just wonder, Becky, there's obviously a point that you've raised that is perhaps for then those interactions in terms of the local resilience forums or the wider resilience partnerships. I just wonder if that's a question you maybe wanted to raise, obviously not just for our speakers, but in general. So you should still be able to come off mute if that's something that you would like to ask.
Sorry, was that the point regarding expenses?
Yes, and I think it then went into then sort of wider ties with local resilience forums, etc.
Yeah, so I mean, the point I put in the chat was that I think my interaction with volunteerism and also me as a volunteer, I can be quite shy about asking for expenses because I always think, oh, it's a charity and I don't want to. But actually, sort of looking back on some of the responses I've done, and this is specifically in the context of I guess, emergency response, is that a number of activities that I've done, and actually I'm a React volunteer as well. You tend to pay your own way, but actually, if you look at the cost of getting the armed forces to step in and do something is absolutely massive to societal economy versus getting volunteers. But at the same time, and so I think the example I raised was Op Foster, which is the unexploded bomb in Plymouth, where we had React volunteers, British Red Cross volunteers, and a number of local infrastructure volunteer organisations all involved. And I don't think any of them claimed expenses. But with cost of living crisis and things like that, actually, would volunteers be more willing if we had some kind of more effective service level agreement or MOU with LRFs, so that there was some element of cost recovery? Because ultimately we are saving them a small fortune. So really interested just to hear the speakers' views on that.
Thank you, Becky. So Michelle, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I totally agree, Becky, to be honest. I think it could be a barrier to people volunteering, and we don't want to create barriers. So I think there needs to be those conversations within some form of agreement if you are brought in to assist in that response, that needs to be part of, the consideration of expense overall. So yeah, I think under the work I've done with Staffordshire Voluntary Emergency Network, I think our framework model identifies that volunteer expenses or organisations wanting to claim, that should be considered in an early stage. So actually, it's a system there. I'm not saying it's 100% right yet, but I think there needs to be that recognition that actually not everybody can do everything for free, and if that's the barrier to somebody volunteering, we don't want to stop them. We want to help them, and because they might have other things to offer which are essential, and just by the fact that they can't afford petrol to get there shouldn't be an issue. So, yeah, I think it needs to.
Joe, I think you were. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, one of the things we do when we have a volunteer on board, then we would give them a volunteer handbook. And I know obviously in an emergency situation it might be slightly different, but you could have maybe a slightly smaller handbook. But one of the things is that there is a claims form in there. So right from the outset, the expectation is that they will claim for any out-of-pocket things. I mean, I would say 90% don't claim for anything, but I mean, we're sort of fairly centrally located in the town, and I mean, somebody used to claim for train fare, which was fair enough to come into Basingstoke, but they don't have to pay for parking because we're fortunate enough to have a car park here as well. But we do set the expectation that they will claim anything out of pocket, but as I say, the majority actually still don't. But
so I mean, I if you don't mind me coming back on that one, and I just wonder whether that is sort of one of the issues, because if people think that they are claiming from a charity, they will feel that actually that's not a good thing. We can't take money off the charity. We are here to contribute towards it. But actually, if we as voluntary sector organisations could claim from local authorities and local resilience forums, I think it's a guilt thing. So if we could remove the guilt factor from people claiming expenses, then actually they may be more able to volunteer. It would alleviate one of their worries. And so I think maybe is that down to us to try and resolve that?
Yeah, it
Thank
could well
you,
be.
Becky. And I see a kind of a related comment then just now by Emmanuel in terms of the Red Cross, just about that, people sometimes not feeling that they should claim, but obviously then within the context of the Red Cross, there being that process. I wonder, we have a couple of kind of questions around insurance. One from Tom, but also Kerry. So I wonder if this is kind of anything that you would maybe like to comment on, plus also maybe Duncan, on the call, Duncan, whether there's anything that you might want to come in on, because I know we kind of had a very brief conversation just before we started the webinar. So I wonder, either Michelle, Joe, Rachel, is there anything around that issue of insurance on volunteers that you might like to reference, including in kind of specific context of the queries in the chat? But Duncan, you might also want to come off mute if there's anything that you would like to add, particularly kind of any links around the spontaneous volunteering, for example. So we have a comment from Tom around insurance and sort of for neighbourhood watch groups, but we also then have, in relation to Kerry, around kind of indemnity insurance on volunteering. So is there any kind of general points that Michelle, Joe, or Rachel that you might like to make on that issue?
Well, I'm not an insurance expert, first of all, so I've got to give a disclaimer that I think any guidance on insurance needs to come from the expert specialists, to get in touch with relevant insurers to make sure that cover is there from an insurance perspective. So it's often then who's actually being insured. So if you've got an organisation like REACT or British Red Cross, then they are more likely, again, well, they will have their own insurance. It's without doubt that they will be insuring their activity and the work that they do. So, but when it comes to different levels of community groups, an informal group of people just self-responding, it's unlikely, unless it's already within some form of structure, it's unlikely that will have insurance. Obviously, then there is going to be a cost to insurance. So it's where the money's coming from to buy insurance and who's going to buy it, and therefore that needs then that structure around it to be able to apply for insurance. So, but again, I think it's probably best to talk to some third sector insurance specialists who understand the voluntary sector, who understand how it works, to ask them about the activities you're likely to be performing, and then get their guidance on it. Because again, once you start getting down into that structured approach of needing to hold a bank account, needing to get funding, and that to just even buy insurance before you do anything, then I think that's going to be a challenge. There's other things we can think around how spontaneous volunteers are spontaneously reacting, which Duncan is the expert on that, and you can say about the Cabinet Office information. So, but yeah, I think still, I'm not sure on Kerry's question though. I'm sorry, Kerry, I can't answer yours.
Wonder, Duncan, if you're able to, are you able to maybe kind of come off mute then? Because I see there's been a couple of more comments kind of added.
Sure. So I'll just put the Cabinet Office guidance in the chat. So the Cabinet Office guidance on spontaneous volunteering very much addressed this issue, which is to say that the insurance should not be a barrier to participating. That if there is a tasking organisation, then that tasking organisation should have insurance to cover the volunteers that have been tasked. So have a chat, like Michelle said, with your insurers and check that they will cover volunteers that you have tasked. Of course, having insurance doesn't mean that if there was anything to happen, doesn't mean that anyone's going to draw on the insurance. There still needs to be proven that there was a need and that there was some element there that causes for the insurance to need to be activated. The other thing that I saw from Tom was about the Neighbourhood Watch, and we've heard the same, that Neighbourhood Watch will provide insurance to community groups for free, but we think that depends on them being a Neighbourhood Watch group. So the Neighbourhood Watch group gets set up, then that covers the insurance from that covers the group, We're also not quite sure on that because we haven't tested it either, but it also might be a way of both establishing a neighbourhood watch group as well as having the volunteers being covered for the activities that that neighbourhood watch group would be involved in. And I'm not quite sure how broad those activities can go. The big thing is, I think, I'm not sure if Michelle actually mentioned the SARA Act, but the SARA Act also provides an element of support to volunteers who are seeking to do good, but inadvertently something goes wrong, and so they would not be personally liable for what goes wrong in the pursuit of good. So having a look at the SARA Act, all of these things are covered within the Cabinet Office guidance. So, that's there's a small section on that in the guidance which has been developed, and then the NCSR module, we've also covered the issue of insurance because it is something that keeps getting raised. Have a look at those documents, and then it's a judgment call from the leaders of the community group as to how they want to deal with it, by buying insurance, by working through local authorities who task people, or through an activity like Neighbourhood Watch. I'll stop there, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Duncan, and thank you very much, Michelle, then, for responding to some of those queries. I'm conscious of the time, so we will be finishing up in the next 10 minutes. So I don't see any active hands raised, so I think I'll just kind of share a couple of points, and then I guess some notices in relation to upcoming activities, and in particular, obviously, the future webinars within this series. So obviously, various points have been raised by our speakers today, some of which were obviously covered by Michelle in terms of what you're seeing on the screen now, and Michelle's referencing some of the NCSR practitioner modules, and in particular this module around the community emergency hubs, which was the first one which we published, and again, it was then us in the context of trying to bring together the webinar series, thinking about how some of that kind of existing material, how that relates to this question of recruiting and retaining volunteers, and then beginning to think through then how things such as the role cards, for example, and those particular roles that you can see referenced on the screen, how you might begin to break down the kind of skills development that volunteers could benefit from in terms of your local or not so local resilience organisation, but then beginning to think through, for example, a hub coordinator role or the communications role, and the skills development that people who are volunteering could possibly have then through those kind of role opportunities, if a community emergency hub was then established in various localities. So beginning to think through then the NCSR module material and how that might relate to volunteering and volunteers' development, how they can develop and accumulate their skills. So thinking about those different roles, I think, is an important point that obviously our speakers have raised today, and is something that both we, in terms of the NCSR, but also yourselves can think about in the future. Another one of the NCSR practitioner modules is obviously relating to the spontaneous volunteers. So Duncan's just referred to then some of the kind of aspects of these particular documents and how they relate to the issue of insurance. So one of the things that's referenced within the spontaneous volunteer modules is then, after a disruption, the standing down of spontaneous volunteers. So beginning to think through various issues, including, perhaps those volunteers have only been volunteering in the context of that particular emergency, but then including how perhaps their act of generosity in response to that particular emergency that might then be converted into something a bit more in terms of future volunteering activities. So thinking about how they might be encouraged to consider future volunteering opportunities through existing kind of organizations, that could obviously then be part of that kind of wider multi-agency response. Some of the the webinars later in the series will obviously deal with various other things that have been brought up during the course of today, including kind of that emotional support and supporting the well-being of volunteers, which is obviously going to be a critical aspect in terms of their well-being, but equally in terms of sustaining volunteers into the future and creating that kind of supportive environment. So, but before giving the notice in terms of the upcoming webinars, for those of you in particular who are maybe dialing in from outside of the UK context, just to really let you know about the International Consortium for Societal Resilience, which now has a web presence. So this is an activity which kind of we've been involved in encouraging and supporting over the last couple of months, trying to build this kind of global network to enhance societal resilience to disruption. So as of the last couple of weeks, there is now a web presence for the INCSR, and you can see on the little thumbnail map the various kind of countries that are currently represented by kind of voluntary national coordinators. So please just encourage anyone on the call from outside of the UK to and those, of course, within the UK to have a look at the web page of the INCSR. And if you think you would like to get involved, to get in touch, then just encouraging you to send us an email. And obviously then we'd like to, set up a conversation with you at some point. That would be absolutely fantastic. In terms of our upcoming webinars within this How to Communities series, so the next webinar is How to Address Flood Risk, which is on the 2nd of June at the same time as today, so 4:30 p.m. UK time. We then have a webinar towards the end of June, on the 25th of June, which will be drawing upon a couple of colleagues from that INCSR network, so a couple of colleagues from New Zealand, who will be talking about their experience in relation to both respecting animals, but also then respecting cultures in times of disruption. So colleagues from the Wellington region in New Zealand. Then on the 1st of July, we will have a webinar on how to support the well-being of volunteers. So really picking up on some of the points that have been raised by our speakers, but also then in the chat in relation to kind of supporting volunteers' well-being, as well as that being an important aspect then of kind of sustaining that welcoming environment so that volunteers obviously stay on for the longer term. So I will, or hopefully Duncan will place the link to those webinars within the chat. And if you haven't already signed up, please do so. You can also see the links to signing up for our webinars on the main NCSR webpage, which you can access at the top link on this screen. So www.ambs.sc.uk/NCSR. So in one of the drop-down menus on that webpage around the webinars, not only can you find links to registering for the upcoming webinars within this series, but you can also then find all of the links to watch all of our previous webinars. So there's already a couple of dozen webinar recordings there that you can access. As of this morning, we had 998 connections on our LinkedIn site. If you would like to be the 999th and the 1000th and you're not already connected with us via LinkedIn, please do so now. And if you're the 1000th, we can obviously give you a shout out over the next couple of days. I'd also encourage people to check out the RBOC website, the Resilience Beyond Observed Capability website, which is our partner within this webinar series. So if you'd like to find out more about that network, please go to their webpage. So I will stop sharing my screen. Just to then give a final shout out to our speakers, to Rachel, to Joe and Michelle for giving of their time and their experience. It was really tremendous webinar, so thank you for contributing. A massive thank you to all of you for attending and for asking questions and contributing to the chat. We look forward to seeing you at our future webinars and feel free when the recording of today's is available to then share that around your various networks. So thank you very much to everyone, and I look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.